I left the hospital early and caught my wife and her lover laughing at my illness in our bed. I vanished, seized her hidden accounts, and locked the estate. But then, wife's 89 missed calls. I am Tom. I am a 40-year-old disabled veteran, and for the last 12 years, I believed I was a happily married man. That illusion was the greatest mistake of my life. My story begins in a sterile, freezing hospital room on a bleak Tuesday morning. I was recovering from a complicated surgery to repair a spinal injury I sustained during my final deployment overseas. The pain was a constant, dull roar in my lower back, a heavy reminder of a life I left behind. But physical pain was something I was trained to handle. The emotional isolation, however, was a completely different battlefield. I had been in that hospital bed for 3 long days and nights, hooked up to monitors that beeped with an agonizing rhythm. And in all that time, my wife, Claire, had not visited me once. Claire was 38 years old, a woman who had once been the center of my universe. When we first met, she was vibrant, supportive, and seemingly grounded. But over the last few years, as my IT business took off and our bank accounts grew, she changed. She became obsessed with appearances, social status, and a lifestyle that felt entirely foreign to me. When the doctors told me I needed the surgery, I expected my wife to be by my side. Instead, she packed a small overnight bag for me, dropped me off at the hospital entrance, and claimed she was simply too stressed and squeamish to handle the hospital environment. She said the smell of antiseptic made her anxious. I gave her a pass, like I always did. I spent those 3 days staring at the ceiling, reading her brief, hollow text messages. She would text things like, "Hope you are resting," or "Super busy at work today, love you." I accepted those crumbs of affection because when you are married for over a decade, you learn to make excuses for the person you love. You convince yourself that they are just going through a phase. But on the morning of my discharge, the doctor came in with good news. He told me my recovery was significantly ahead of schedule and that I could go home a full 24 hours early. I felt a surge of genuine excitement. I pictured walking through my front door, surprising Claire, and finally sleeping in my own comfortable bed. I wanted the warmth of my home. I wanted my wife. I signed the release papers, ignoring the sharp twinges in my spine as I dressed myself in a pair of loose sweatpants and a zip-up hoodie. I did not call Claire to tell her I was coming. I wanted it to be a surprise. I wanted to see her face light up when she realized I was okay. That naive, hopeful thought makes me sick to my stomach now. I gathered my small bag, thanked the nursing staff, and walked out into the crisp morning air to hail a cab. I had absolutely no idea that I was walking straight into a nightmare that would permanently alter the course of my existence. The cab ride to our suburban neighborhood took about 45 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. I sat in the back seat, watching the city skyline fade into the quiet, tree-lined streets of our community. My mind was racing with thoughts of comfort. I was imagining the smell of coffee in our kitchen, the soft blankets on our bed, and the quiet peace of just being home with Claire. I leaned my head against the cold glass of the window and reflected on our financial success. We lived in a beautiful, sprawling 4-bedroom house. I had worked 80-hour weeks to build my company from the ground up, ensuring that Claire never had to worry about a single bill. She worked part-time at a local university administration office, mostly just to get out of the house and socialize. I provided everything. I gave her the luxury SUV, the expensive vacations, and the endless stream of disposable income. I thought providing for her was the ultimate expression of love. As the cab finally turned onto my street, a deep sense of relief washed over me. But the moment the driver pulled up to my driveway, that relief evaporated, replaced by a cold, heavy knot in the pit of my stomach. Parked right in the middle of my driveway, blocking the path to the garage, was a sleek, black sports car I had never seen before. It was parked haphazardly, angled aggressively, as if the driver was in a massive rush to get inside. It was not a neighbor's car. It was not a delivery vehicle. It was an intrusion. I paid the driver, adding a $20 tip, and grabbed my overnight bag. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just staring at the unfamiliar vehicle. The air suddenly felt painfully still. A rational part of my brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a friend of hers, or a plumber, or someone from her work dropping off documents. But my military instincts, the same instincts that had kept me alive overseas, were screaming at me. Every hair on my arm stood up. The front door was unlocked. Not just unlocked, but slightly ajar, as if someone had kicked it shut behind them but failed to latch it. Claire was borderline paranoid about home security. She never left the door unlatched. I pushed the heavy oak door open with a gentle, silent push. The house was dead quiet. The kind of quiet that feels thick and suffocating. I stepped into the foyer, my boots making no sound on the hardwood floor. I did not call out her name. I did not announce my presence. Something ancient and primal inside me knew exactly what I was about to find. I just needed to confirm it with my own eyes. I walked slowly toward the staircase, ignoring the fresh, agonizing pain radiating from my surgical incisions. Every step was deliberate. As I reached the second-floor hallway, I began to hear sounds. Soft, muffled noises coming from the master bedroom at the end of the hall. The door was halfway open, casting a narrow strip of morning light across the carpet. I stopped a few feet away, standing perfectly still in the shadows. I did not need to see into the room yet, because the voices drifting out of it told me everything. It was a man's voice. A deep, arrogant tone that I did not recognize. He was speaking casually, entirely relaxed in my sanctuary. I listened as he said something about my military background, mocking the way I walked. He actually laughed and said, "The guy probably trips over his own shadow with that bad leg." Then I heard it. The sound that broke my heart into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Claire laughed. It was not a polite chuckle. It was a loud, genuine, cruel laugh. She told him to stop being so mean, but her voice was dripping with amusement. Then she sighed and said the exact words that will echo in my head until the day I die. She said, "Honestly, Matt, I was kind of hoping the surgery would go wrong. It is so exhausting dealing with him when he is hurting. He is such a burden sometimes. I just wish I had my freedom back without the messy paperwork." I stood there in the dark hallway, listening to my wife of 12 years tell her lover that she wished I was dead just to save her the inconvenience of a divorce. The betrayal hit me so hard I felt like I had been shot in the chest. I finally leaned forward just enough to look through the crack in the door. I saw them. I saw Claire, the woman I had given my entire youth to, tangled in the expensive sheets I had bought, with a man named Matt. He was older, maybe 45, with the smug look of a guy who thought he owned the world. My wedding photo was sitting on the nightstand right next to them, watching the whole sickening scene unfold. In that moment, a profound transformation occurred inside my mind. If I had burst into the room screaming, I would have been acting out of pain. I would have given them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. But her words had killed the husband inside me. The man who loved Claire died right there in that hallway. What was left behind was the soldier. Cold, analytical, and entirely detached from emotional suffering. I did not shed a single tear. I did not gasp. I just stared at them for 10 full seconds, committing every disgusting detail to memory. They were laughing at my pain. They were comfortable in my territory. They thought I was a weak, broken man who would eventually just fade away and leave them my fortune. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I slowly backed away from the bedroom door, placing my feet carefully on the floorboards I knew would not creak. I retreated down the stairs like a ghost, fading out of my own home without leaving a single trace of my presence. I walked out the front door, pulled it shut with a soft, decisive click, and walked straight back to the end of the driveway. By some stroke of luck, the cab driver had pulled over to answer a phone call and was still sitting down the street. I walked over, opened the back door, and slid inside. The driver looked at me through the rearview mirror, his eyebrows raised in confusion. He told me I had just gotten home. I looked at him with a face completely devoid of emotion and simply told him to drive. As the car pulled away from my suburban illusion, my breathing slowed down. My heart rate, which should have been hammering through my ribs, was steady and calm. This is the reality of severe trauma mixed with military conditioning. When a civilian faces a catastrophic emotional event, they panic. They scream, they throw things, they demand immediate answers. But when you have spent years in high-stress combat environments, your brain is wired differently. Panic gets you killed. Acting out of anger makes you sloppy and predictable. If I had walked into that bedroom and confronted them, Claire would have cried, Matt would have tried to fight me, or worse, they would have manipulated the narrative to make me look like an unhinged, dangerous veteran. They would have used my anger against me in divorce court. By staying silent, I retained 100% of the power. I possessed the most dangerous weapon in any conflict, the element of absolute surprise. I sat in the back of the cab, staring blankly at the passing traffic, and began to outline my campaign. I was not planning revenge in the traditional sense. Revenge is chaotic and emotional. I was planning a total, scorched earth dismantling of her life. She wanted freedom without the messy paperwork? I was going to give her a masterclass in paperwork. She thought I was a burden? I was going to become the heaviest weight she had ever carried. I opened my phone and disabled my location sharing. I then sent a brief text to Claire. It read, "Doctor says I need to stay one more night for observation. Feeling very tired. Will text you tomorrow." Hit send. I knew she would read it, breathe a sigh of relief, and roll right back over to her lover. The trap was set, and she was willingly walking deeper into it. I told the driver to change course and head straight into the downtown financial district. I needed to see my lawyer immediately. As we drove, I took a mental inventory of my assets and felt a grim sense of satisfaction at my own paranoia. You see, about 3 years ago, I started noticing disturbing patterns in Claire's behavior. It was not infidelity at first, but extreme financial irresponsibility. She was burning through thousands of dollars a month on designer clothes, luxury spa weekends, and lavish dinners with her friends. Whenever I tried to discuss a budget, she would gaslight me, accusing me of being controlling and reminding me that I made more than enough money. Instead of fighting with her, I quietly took action to protect the empire I had built. I hired a specialized financial team and restructured my entire IT company into a blind trust. I legally separated my primary income and my major assets from our marital property. I updated the deeds and moved the vast majority of my wealth into holding companies that Claire knew absolutely nothing about. At the time, I told myself I was just being a smart businessman protecting us from potential corporate lawsuits. But deep down, my subconscious knew the truth. I was building a fortified bunker because I knew the storm was eventually coming. Claire thought she had equal access to a multi-million-dollar fortune. In reality, she only had access to our joint checking account, which I deliberately kept funded with just enough money to maintain her illusions. I realized then that she had been using my money to fund her affair with Matt. The fancy dinners she claimed were with her girlfriends, the weekend getaways she said were for work retreats. It was all paid for by the sweat off my back and the pain in my spine. She had been laughing at me while spending my money on another man. The cold logic of the situation crystallized in my mind. The objective was no longer divorce. The objective was total asset recovery and the complete destruction of her safety net. By the time I was finished, she would not just be divorced. She would be financially ruined, publicly exposed, and cast out of the social elite circle she valued more than human decency. The cab pulled up to a towering glass office building. I paid the fare, grabbed my bag, and walked into the lobby, a man with a broken body but an unbreakable will. It was just past noon when I walked into the law offices of Carl Matthews. Carl and I went way back. I had helped him set up and troubleshoot his firm's entire computer network system for free when he was just starting out, and he had handled all my corporate structuring over the years. We had a bond built on mutual respect. When I walked past his receptionist and stepped into his spacious corner office, he looked up from his paperwork and froze. I was still wearing my hospital sweatpants, a faded hoodie, and holding a cheap overnight bag. I looked terrible, pale from surgery and running on pure adrenaline. Carl stood up quickly, asking what I was doing out of the hospital, reminding me I was supposed to be in recovery. I sat down heavily in the leather chair opposite his desk, ignored his questions, and laid the situation out in a flat, monotone voice. I told him exactly what I saw. I told him exactly what I heard them say about my illness. I did not raise my voice, I did not curse, and I did not ask for pity. I just delivered the intelligence report. Carl sat back in his chair, his hands steepled together, his face a mask of professional shock. He asked me if I wanted to file for divorce immediately. I looked him dead in the eye and told him I wanted far more than a divorce. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick folder I had maintained for the past year. I slid it across the mahogany desk. I told him that inside the folder were the documents proving that the business, the investment accounts, and the primary real estate were all safely shielded in the trust. I explained that Claire had never updated her power of attorney after our marriage and that she was completely unaware of the corporate restructuring. Carl flipped through the pages, his eyes widening with every document he read. He looked up at me in disbelief and whispered that I had already moved everything. I nodded calmly. I told him that as of right now, she thought she was a millionaire, but by the end of the day, she would be completely locked out. Carl let out a low, impressed whistle. He leaned forward and said, "Tom, you are going to war." I shook my head, my face completely stony. "No, Carl," I said. "I am already winning it. I need the restraining order drafted, the divorce papers filed, and the civil suit for asset theft prepared by tomorrow morning." Carl nodded slowly, grabbed a fresh legal pad, and we got to work. If you are enjoying this story so far, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with the name of the city you are living in. Every single comment helps the video reach more people. Thank you so much. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the legal machinery was in motion, but I had immediate physical logistics to handle. I left Carl's office and rented a nondescript sedan from a downtown agency. I needed mobility without being recognized. I parked a few streets over from my own house and made a phone call to a premium emergency locksmith service I had used for my business. I paid triple their usual rate for an immediate dispatch. I sat in the rented car, watching my house from a distance until I saw Matt's black sports car finally pull out of the driveway and speed away. 10 minutes later, Claire's luxury SUV backed out and drove off in the opposite direction. They were probably going to grab a late lunch, blissfully unaware that the countdown timer on their entire reality had just hit 0. As soon as the coast was clear, I drove up to my house. The locksmith arrived 5 minutes later in a white van. I showed him my identification and the deed to the house to prove ownership, and then I gave him a simple directive: change every single lock on the property. Front door, back door, garage entry door, even the side gate. I did not care what it cost. While he was drilling out the old brass deadbolts and installing high-security smart locks, I went to the primary control panel in the hallway. I logged into the home security system using my master administrator privileges. I permanently deleted Claire's access codes, wiped her fingerprints from the biometric scanner, and removed her phone from the authorized devices list. I then called the security company's dispatch center. I identified myself using my master password and formally reported that my soon-to-be ex-wife was no longer a resident of the property. I instructed them to flag her as an unauthorized intruder, stating that if her access code was attempted, they were to immediately dispatch the police without calling me for verification first. Within 90 minutes, the house that had been an open playground for her infidelity was transformed into an impenetrable fortress. I walked through the quiet, empty rooms, feeling the surgical pain in my back flaring up again. But the pain was overshadowed by a profound sense of territorial control. This was my sanctuary, paid for with my blood and sweat, and I had successfully purged the infection from it. I locked the brand new deadbolt on the front door and drove away to strike the next target. My next stop was the main branch of my bank. It was nearly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I walked in, bypassed the standard teller line, and requested a sit-down meeting with the branch manager. I had been a high-net-worth client there for years, so I was immediately escorted into a private glass office. I handed the manager my identification and told her I needed to execute an immediate, unilateral closure of my joint checking and savings accounts. The manager, a professional woman in her 50s, looked slightly concerned but pulled up my profile on her computer. She noted that there was exactly $23,000 left in the joint accounts. I asked her to print out the transaction history for the last 3 months. When she handed me the papers, I highlighted a series of massive withdrawals and credit card payments. Thousands of dollars spent at high-end boutiques, luxury hotels, and expensive restaurants. I explained to the manager that my wife had been draining these funds without my consent while I was hospitalized. But then I played my trump card. I pulled out my federal documents showing that a significant portion of the money directly deposited into that specific joint account was my Veterans Affairs disability compensation. Under federal law, misappropriating VA benefits without the veteran's consent is a severe offense. I instructed the manager to immediately transfer the remaining $23,000 into a brand new, private account under my name only. I then formally requested that all credit cards linked to the joint account, which were currently in Claire's possession, be frozen and flagged for suspected financial fraud. The manager's eyes widened. She knew the legal implications of what I was doing. She asked me if I was sure I wanted to proceed with a fraud freeze, warning me that any transaction Clare attempted would instantly decline. I looked at her with a deadpan expression and said, "I have never been more sure of anything in my entire life." She typed furiously on her keyboard for a few moments, clicked a final button, and nodded. The accounts were drained. The credit cards were dead plastic. Claire was out shopping, buying expensive lunches, completely oblivious to the fact that she did not have a single penny to her name. I thanked the manager, took my new debit card, and walked out. The financial oxygen supply was officially cut off. It was 4:30 in the afternoon. The physical perimeter was secure, the financial assets were frozen, but I had one more piece of heavy artillery to drop before the day ended. I sat in my rental car in the bank parking lot and called the luxury auto dealership where I had purchased Claire's SUV. Because I anticipated her reckless behavior, the car was solely in my name, and I had negotiated a guaranteed buyback clause when I bought it a year ago. I spoke directly to the dealership's general manager. I told him I was exercising the buyback clause immediately due to a sudden change in marital status. I authorized him to send a repo truck to my home address to collect the vehicle before midnight. He agreed, promising to send a driver out within the hour. I called Carl, my lawyer, and told him the stage was fully set. Carl, wanting to make sure I was safe and not doing anything illegal, insisted on meeting me near my house. We parked Carl's large SUV across the street, partially hidden by a row of thick oak trees, giving us a perfect view of my driveway. We sat in the car, drinking stale coffee, waiting in silence. The sun was just beginning to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the manicured lawns. At exactly 5:30, the trap finally sprang. Claire's luxury SUV pulled into the driveway. Matt's black sports car followed closely behind, parking aggressively on the curb. They got out, laughing together. Matt had his arm casually draped around her waist. They walked up the pathway to the front porch, acting like they owned the world. I watched through the tinted window of Carl's car, taking a slow sip of my coffee. Claire reached into her designer purse, pulled out her key, and slid it into the front door. She turned it. Nothing happened. She frowned, pulled it out, and tried again. It jammed. She jiggled the handle in frustration. Then, she moved to the electronic keypad and confidently punched in her 4-digit code. A loud, harsh red light flashed, followed by a sharp error beep. She tried again. Beep. Panic slowly began to wash over her face. She looked at Matt, gesturing wildly at the door. Matt, trying to play the tough guy, stepped forward, grabbed the heavy handle, and yanked it hard. It did not budge an inch. They walked over to the garage keypad. Same result. Complete denial of entry. Suddenly, the shrill, piercing sound of the house alarm began blaring from the external sirens. The security company was doing exactly what I paid them to do. Claire jumped back, dropping her purse on the porch. She pulled out her phone, her hands visibly shaking. Inside Carl's car, my phone, which was set to silent mode, lit up on the dashboard. Incoming call from Claire. I watched the screen flash. I let it ring. Then another call. Then another. The barrage of the 89 missed calls had officially begun. I looked at Carl, who was staring out the window with a look of pure astonishment. I told him quietly, "Let us go home." As we drove away, leaving them stranded on the porch with the sirens wailing, I did not feel an ounce of pity. The war had just begun. The morning after the lockout, I was sitting on the patio of a quiet, upscale hotel downtown. The sun was warm on my face, and I watched the early commuters scurry past with their briefcases and earbuds. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of detachment. I was no longer the man who was worried about his wife's happiness or the man who was desperately trying to fix a broken marriage. I was just a man with a plan. My phone, which I had kept on silent and face down on the table, had been vibrating almost non-stop since 5:30 the previous evening. I finally picked it up and checked the notifications. 89 missed calls from Daphne. 12 voicemails, each one progressively more hysterical than the last. There were also 6 calls from an unknown number, which I presumed was Wyatt. I did not listen to a single voicemail. I did not need to hear her lies, her excuses, or her demands for an explanation. I already had all the explanation I needed from the hallway of my own home. Instead of engaging with her, I opened the browser on my phone and logged into Bennett's secure client portal. He had been working through the night. The digital folders were ready. First, the divorce papers were officially filed with the county clerk. Second, the application for an emergency restraining order was pending. I had provided Bennett with the high-definition footage from the home security cameras. I made sure to tell him exactly which timestamps to highlight. I wanted the judge to see the blatant nature of their betrayal. I wanted them to see that Daphne and Wyatt didn't even bother to close the blinds. They had treated my home, my sanctuary, like a cheap motel while I was lying in a hospital bed recovering from a military injury. As I sipped my black coffee, I felt a cold surge of satisfaction. This was not about anger anymore. It was about cleaning up a mess. Daphne had spent years treating me like a paycheck and a safety net, but she had forgotten one very important thing. I was a strategist long before I was a husband. I knew how to identify a threat, and I knew how to neutralize it. I closed my phone, leaned back in my chair, and prepared for the next phase of the operation. While the legal system handled the domestic side of the disaster, I turned my attention to the professional world. Daphne worked part-time in the administration office of a local college, and her lover, Wyatt, was a tenured professor in the history department there. They thought they were being clever, using their workplace as a backdrop for their affair. They had no idea how much digital evidence they had left behind. Over the last few months, I had noticed Daphne's behavior changing, so I had quietly used my IT expertise to monitor our shared home network. I had discovered that they were using university servers and official school email accounts to coordinate their secret getaways and send inappropriate messages to each other. I spent the rest of the morning compiling a devastating dossier. I included screenshots of their messages, timestamped logs of their long lunch breaks that lasted 4 hours, and receipts for hotel rooms they had booked during school hours. I even found evidence that they had used university credit cards for a research trip that was actually a romantic beach weekend. I drafted a professional, clinical email and sent it directly to the university's Title IX department and the Office of Academic Integrity. I didn't add any emotional commentary. I didn't call them names. I simply presented the facts. A tenured professor was engaged in a disruptive, unprofessional relationship with a staff member, and they were misappropriating university resources to facilitate it. I hit send at precisely 11 o'clock. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, I received a polite but brief reply. The university thanked me for the documentation and informed me that an internal investigation had been opened immediately. They mentioned that both Wyatt and Daphne had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. I knew how these institutions worked. In the current climate, any hint of professional misconduct or misuse of funds was a death sentence for a career. Wyatt's tenure, his reputation, and his comfortable 6-figure salary were all about to go up in flames. And Daphne, who loved the prestige of working at the college, was about to find out that her better man couldn't protect her job. I wasn't just taking her house, I was taking her identity. As the afternoon faded, I decided it was time to address the public narrative. Daphne had always been obsessed with her social media presence. Her Facebook and Instagram were filled with carefully curated photos of our perfect life, our expensive dinners, and her inspiring quotes about loyalty and love. I knew she would try to play the victim. I knew she would tell her friends that I had suddenly snapped, that I was being abusive, and that I had heartlessly kicked her out of her own home. True to form, she posted a dramatic update on Facebook that evening. She wrote a long, rambling paragraph about betrayal, emotional manipulation, and how hard it is to stay strong when the person you trust most turns into a monster. She didn't name me directly, but the implication was clear. Her friends were already commenting with heart emojis and words of support, calling me names I won't repeat. I sat in my hotel room and watched the comments pour in. I didn't feel angry. I felt motivated. I created a burner account and went to her post. I didn't leave a long, angry rant. I simply posted a polite comment. I wrote, "This is a very moving post, Daphne. But I am curious. Did you mention the part where you mocked your husband's disability while he was in the hospital? Or the part where you brought your lover into his bed while he was recovering from surgery?" I then attached a single, clear still frame from the security camera footage, showing her and Wyatt in our bedroom. Within minutes, the comment section went dead silent. Then it exploded. People started sharing the photo. Some of her best friends started asking her if it was true. The carefully constructed image of the perfect, grieving wife was shattered in an instant. Her social circle began to erode in real time. She had used the community as a weapon against me for years. Now, I was letting the truth do the same to her. I blocked her account and turned off my phone. The digital execution was complete. 2 weeks had passed since the night I changed the locks. In that time, the silence from Daphne had turned from hysterical calls to a heavy, brooding quiet. She was staying with her parents, Sylvia and Winston. I knew this because Bennett had served her with the divorce papers at their front door. Sylvia and Winston had always been a thorn in my side. For 12 years, they treated me like an obligation, a placeholder until Daphne found someone better. Sylvia was a woman who lived for status, and Winston was a man who simply did whatever Sylvia told him to do. I remembered one Thanksgiving where Sylvia told me, right to my face, that I wasn't exactly the husband they had prayed for, but at least I paid the bills. I decided it was time to pay them one last visit. I pulled into their suburban driveway on a Sunday afternoon. I was wearing a clean suit, and I felt stronger than I had in years. The surgical pain was finally fading, replaced by a sense of purpose. I carried a slim, black folder under my arm. When I rang the doorbell, Daphne opened it. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red and puffy, her hair was unwashed, and she had lost weight. She froze when she saw me. She asked me what I was doing there. I didn't answer her. I just looked past her and said I was there to speak with her parents. Sylvia appeared behind her, that familiar, condescending sneer firmly in place. She called me a ghost and asked if I had come to finally apologize for my erratic behavior. I didn't rise to the bait. I asked if I could come in. Sylvia smirked and told me to let the man speak, probably thinking I was there to beg for a reconciliation. They led me into the living room where Winston was sitting in his recliner, looking uncomfortable. I sat on the edge of the sofa, opened the folder, and began to lay out the final pieces of the puzzle. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to deliver a final report. I opened the folder and took out the first document. It was a detailed breakdown of the $38,000 in unauthorized withdrawals Daphne had made from our accounts over the last 6 months. I showed them the timestamps and the Venmo transactions where she had sent money directly to Wyatt for their getaways. I explained that because that money included my federal VA disability benefits, her actions constituted federal theft. Sylvia tried to interrupt, calling it marital assets, but I silenced her with a look. I told her that federal law disagreed. Then I pulled out the second document. It was the printed email from the university's ethics committee. I explained that because of their misconduct, Wyatt had been stripped of his tenure and Daphne had been fired. They were now both unemployed and facing a massive loss of reputation. Daphne started trembling, her voice cracking as she asked why I was doing this. I looked her directly in the eyes and told her that for 12 years, I put her first. I told her I came home from the hospital just to hear her wish I was dead while she was with another man in our bed. I reminded her that she had mocked the very injuries I received while serving our country. Finally, I pulled out the third document. This was the one that would end it all. It was the new deed to our house. I explained to them that Daphne had never noticed I had quietly sold the property to a private trust owned by my cousin, Derek, weeks before our marriage exploded. I had then leased it back for a short term. Legally, the house did not belong to either of us anymore. Every minute she had spent in that house after the locks were changed, she was technically trespassing on private property owned by a third party. Sylvia's face went pale. She called me a liar, but I told her she was welcome to verify the records with the county registrar. I wasn't bluffing. I had planned this exit strategy with the precision of a military operation. They were sitting in a house of cards, and I had just pulled the bottom card out. The room was deathly quiet. I could see the realization sinking in on Winston's face. He was a man who hated conflict, and he was realizing his daughter had brought a storm into his home that he couldn't handle. But I had one more surprise for them. I reached into the folder and pulled out one final paper. It was a formal cancellation notice for a mortgage assistance program. I looked at Sylvia and Winston and told them that I knew they had been struggling with their own mortgage for the last 5 years. I revealed that I had been secretly paying over $2,000 every month toward their home loan, without ever telling them, just to make sure Daphne's parents were comfortable. I told them I was planning to surprise them with a full payoff of their mortgage this coming December as a Christmas gift. But then I shrugged and tossed the cancellation notice on the coffee table. I told them that as of 10 o'clock this morning, those payments had officially stopped. The silence that followed was broken by Sylvia's sobbing. She realized that by encouraging Daphne's behavior and mocking me, she had just cost herself her own home. Without my monthly contributions, they were 3 months behind and facing foreclosure within the next 90 days. I stood up and straightened my jacket. I told Daphne that she would be hearing from Bennett again regarding the recovery of the stolen funds, and if she didn't cooperate, we would pursue criminal charges for the federal theft. I told her I didn't want a single thing from her except the money she stole and the space she occupied in my life. As I walked toward the front door, I could hear the chaos erupting behind me. Daphne was screaming at me, Sylvia was wailing about the house, and Winston was finally finding his voice, shouting at both of them for being so incredibly stupid. I stepped out onto the porch and breathed in the fresh air. It was a beautiful afternoon. The weight that had been crushing my chest for years was gone. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about making a lot of noise. It was about silence, strategy, and letting people face the consequences of their own choices. I got into my car and drove away, never looking back. In the weeks and months that followed, the fallout from that afternoon was total. My war was over, but the wreckage remained for everyone else. Wyatt's life collapsed with stunning speed. His wife, who had no idea about the affair until I anonymously sent her the beach selfies with Daphne, filed for divorce immediately. She was a high-powered attorney, and she absolutely gutted him in court. Between the loss of his tenured position, his pension being frozen during the investigation, and his wife taking him for everything he had left, Wyatt ended up living in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment on the wrong side of town. He went from being a respected professor to a man who couldn't even get a job at a community college. Daphne didn't fare much better. Her parents' house went into foreclosure 2 months later. Sylvia and Winston were forced to move into a small retirement community they despised, and they haven't spoken to Daphne since the day they lost their home. They blamed her for everything, and in a way, they were right. Daphne herself eventually landed a job as a retail clerk at a home goods store. It was the kind of place she used to mock on her social media, calling it a place for people with no ambition. Now, she spends her days scanning barcodes and dealing with difficult customers for minimum wage. She tried to message me a few more times, asking if we could at least talk, but I never replied. I just blocked her. There was nothing left to say. I had already spoken through my actions, and the message had been received loud and clear. It has been exactly 1 year since the day I was released from the hospital early. Today, I am sitting on the porch of a cozy, timber-framed cabin by a quiet lake, just a few miles from the Veterans Affairs Hospital. The air is clean, and the only sound is the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. I spend my mornings fishing, my afternoons volunteering with fellow veterans, and my evenings reading by the fireplace. I am at peace. I used a portion of the restitution money that the court ordered Daphne to pay back to start a small nonprofit organization. We help military families secure housing and legal aid during difficult times. Every month, like clockwork, $523.19 lands in the nonprofit's account. It is Daphne's court-ordered monthly installment. I don't use a penny of it for myself. I use it to make sure other veterans don't have to go through the betrayal I did without support. People often ask me if I miss her. I tell them the truth. I don't miss Daphne. I miss the person I thought she was, but I now realize that person never actually existed. She was a character she played until the curtain finally fell. This wasn't just about revenge for me. It was about closure. It was about proving to myself that, even when I was at my weakest, I still had the strength to stand up for my own dignity. I am no longer a burden. I am a survivor, a builder, and for the first time in a very long time, I am a free man. Some people tell me I went too far by destroying her family and career, but considering she laughed at my illness while in my bed, am I wrong? Or should I have shown mercy and accepted her apology? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more jaw-dropping stories of betrayal and justice. Every lie has its reckoning. Stay sharp, and I'll see you in the next story.